So my name is Cindy Carpentieri, and I'm interviewing for Georgia State University's Women's March Oral History Project. The date is May 6, 2018, and the interview is taking place at Athens, Georgia. We just say that so whoever is doing this knows. Yeah, it's a leader. All right, so I do have a list of questions, and I will refer to it periodically, but we may go all over the place, and I may, so feel free to, if you start talking, just go where you want to talk with that. Okay. So what year were you born and where?
In 1969, my first home was Sapelo Island, but it's an island without a causeway, and so my mother didn't think that giving birth there was a great idea, so I was born in Brunswick.
Oh, wow. So your family is from Sapelo Island?
My dad was a researcher. He was a scientist, and so that's where he was doing research at the time. And then he came to UGA when I was still pretty small, so I was pretty much raised in Athens.
Okay.
But we spent a lot of time on the coast, too.
What kind of research and science was he doing?
He was geology. He was comparing the bottom of the sedimentary bottom of the ocean and the estuaries and the salt marshes to the fossil marsh further inland. So comparing those two.
Oh, that's actually, that's one of those things I never thought about. Yeah. Yes. All right. Yeah. What did your mom do? Did she work while you were growing up?
She was a homemaker at first, and then when I was in high school, she went back to school and became a nurse.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And are they both still living?
No, they both died when I was in my early 20s.
Okay. What was life like growing up as far as, like, did you guys, specifically around sort of politics or civic involvement, did you guys have conversations about that at all?
I had a really good childhood. So I had, I'm one of those weird people that had one. Woo! And my parents were very open about all kinds of things, sexuality and politics and that sort of thing. So I don't think, they weren't activist. It wasn't a huge deal in our house. My mother became very religious for a time. And so that was where a lot of the energy was spent. My father was not, so that was sort of an interesting push-pull, but their marriage worked well. But the first time I sort of became aware, they were definitely for Jimmy Carter and supportive of Jimmy Carter and excited that he won.
Cool. Okay.
But in retrospect, after Trump's election, as I started trying to figure out what the hell happened, and did reading, I realized that when I was around 5th grade or so, my mom pulled us out of this lovely church that we had been going to, that was moderate and service-oriented and community-minded, and took us to a fundamentalist church in Watkinsville. And now that I see the bigger picture, it was exactly at the same time that the evangelicals were yanking their support from Carter and moving on to Reagan. And so whatever was happening, I mean, I wish so much I could ask my mom about it. Yeah. Whether it was just coincidence or whether she was sort of following other people who were following, going into these more fundamentalist evangelical. I didn't even have that word evangelical to pin it on. And that's been nice in the last year or two in all my reading. I'm like, I finally have a word to say, not me.
Right. Yeah, and when you're little, like, how old were you when?
So like around 5th grade, like, starting in middle school, and I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Yeah. I was going to be a missionary. I did Teen Missions International as a group out of Florida, and I went with their organization twice and did mission work in the mission field. I helped to build an orphanage. Then I did proselytizing on the streets of Gibraltar in Europe.
Oh, wow.
And both of those situations, cracks developed in that belief system.
Really?
In the first summer, when I was 14 in Haiti. And then by the time I was finishing up the Gibraltar summer, I was like, these folks there's something rotten here.
Do you remember why you thought that?
It was on a personal level at first. I noticed they were very anti-science. And I had one woman tell me straight out that the scientists are liars and they're trying to, they're trying to undermine our belief system. And they're talking about my dad. My dad and my grandpa were probably the most honorable men I have ever met.
Yeah.
And I saw science from the inside. You know, I remember there was one dinner one night where one of my dad's colleagues had been pursuing this vein of research for like over a decade, and it didn't pan out. And he was crushed, but he sure didn't cook the books.
Yeah.
You know, he took it as an answer and then started a new direction. So, you know, to be told that these people are liars, and I was like, well, what about the fossils? And they're like, well, those are all planted. And I'm like, I've been in the field. I have dug them out of the ground myself in a place where you couldn't have planted. Yeah. I mean, we're talking like, you know, a vast field and a kid with a rock hammer while my dad's doing other stuff and we're pounding on things and uncovering fossils. You know, I'm just like, no. And just the, I'm trying to figure which direction to go with this, but what I have sort of come to see through all my reading, I came across mention of St. Augustine. Mm-hmm. And after the fall of Rome, he tried to comfort the Christians and wrote, I haven't read all of it, so I'm kind of speaking off of metaphors that I've grabbed onto here, but he talked about the city of God and the city of man. And sort of the way I envision that is, like the modern day city of Rome is this religious enclave with a larger city around it. Right. And what I sort of felt like St. Augustine was hinting at was, you know, it's an invisible city, it's the city of God, it's here on earth, you build it. Yeah. And then increasingly what I saw the evangelicals was defending it. Mm-hmm. And they've become the gatekeepers. And so this invisible city of God is deciding who all belongs in here and who all doesn't deserve it and is out there. Mm-hmm. It's a very subtle shift. But what I saw is that these people that I had been spending a lot of time with, their most important role was gatekeeper and wall builder, which is, you know, stunning to me that Trump is so excited about building this big wall. Yeah. But I kept looking at the Gospels. You know, my mom was so religious, she read us the Bible every morning at breakfast. And so I've read through the whole thing. I've, you know all the stories, and I'm like, that's not what Christ came to do. Yeah. That's not what he did. He didn't take over the government. He didn't build any walls. He didn't set anybody up as gatekeepers. Mm-hmm. He went forth with his disciples, talking to people, touching people, going places that were well outside their comfort zone, and caring for people that were marginalized. And, you know, suddenly the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes were just like left by the wayside. And in this mission work that I did, what I saw was so many people. It was sort of about scoring victories. Okay, we saved somebody, and they're inside the city of God now, and woohoo, we upped our numbers. And it wasn't so much about alleviating suffering. Mm-hmm. It wasn't about empathy. And one of the things I discovered, especially with Haiti, was, these people were really sad and that they had so many needs, but they were doing a lot of things right. You know, when it came time to, they were not materialistic. They were very community-minded. I felt like what we needed was an exchange of thought, like you help me, I help you, let's work together, let's share, let's learn from each other. And that was not at all what I saw in the evangelicals. It was all about them being right, about having a correct answer for everything, and about getting people into the walled city. And who cares what happens to everybody who refuses and is left on the outside? And I thought, I cannot follow that path anymore.
Yeah, did you talk to your mom about that, and how did that go over when you expressed that?
Well, it was interesting. It was a long, I had to pull back when I came back from those mission trips. I wasn't sure, you know, when you're like 16, 17, you don't have the inner resources that you do later on. Oh, yeah. So it was sort of like this cooling period of step back and try to figure out what in the heck just happened to me on this mission trip. Yeah. And some of the, people I had been spending a lot of time with, I no longer wanted to be with. It was a kind of a major shift. Oh, yeah. But my mother had started back to school. Mm-hmm. So she took a step back. And at that same time, she also became disenfranchised, which was sort of, it helped our relationship because it happened at the same time. But what happened to her was there were a lot of people at that church who felt like if a woman didn't have to work, like if she wasn't a single mom, a widow, you know, then she really didn't have any business working. And so there was a lot of talk about the pagan university and the evil campus, and you don't become a part of that if you don't absolutely have to, kind of thing. So she got some flack for that. And then when I was a senior in high school, my dad got lung cancer. He had long been a smoker. So she was working 3 to 11 shift as a nurse. So on Sunday, she started staying home. She wanted to spend time with her husband.
Sure.
And she caught flack for that too, because she wasn't at church. So she just was kind of like, okay. She saw kind of what was there. And then my dad died New Year's Day of 92, and my mom was just kind of bottomed out, not feeling good, losing weight. And somebody thought to do an HIV test, and that's what it was. She had gotten a needle stick, and she just had thought, oh, this can't happen to me.
Yeah.
Well, either talk about ending up with the other disenfranchised folks. All the services, it was all full of gay men, dying of this disease.
Yeah.
And very quickly it went from those people to people. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So was she, even at that point when she was diagnosed with HIV, like her mindset, was she still of the evangelical mindset at all, or has she left that behind?
I think for a little while she sort of left all religion behind, and then as she was dying, I think she came to a point, she talked about God more often. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that's really stuck with me, she says that when it comes down to it, it's just between you and the Lord. Mm-hmm. And that was how she came to feel about, that it was very personal, that all those people's opinions did not matter. It was all between her and her Maker.
And certainly when you're in the process of dying, it definitely is personal. Nobody can help you at that point.
No, it is. It's a very, I think, lonely kind of place. But the people that I had spent my middle school, high school years with at this church, they just vanished. Mm-hmm. But the church that we had gone to up until we left came out of the woodwork with no questions, but with casseroles and with flowers and with phone calls of, hey, is there anything I can help you do? And that's the church that we belong to now. We've gone back. But yeah, so that, when I look at the people, they talk about this core base that Trump has as supporters. In some ways, I'm like so shocked that all the things that he has done and said has not cracked things wide open for these people. But then I see that, all the people that I knew back then, and what they're clinging to. If faith is not flexible, it shatters. Mm-hmm. And they don't want their faith to shatter, so they cling to what they've got. And I think I'm much more interested in people who have a faith that can flex and bend, that they consider all the possibilities. And
yeah, have you talked to any of those people from your middle and high school years in the last few years?
Well, what's interesting is it's been 35 years now since I did the Haiti trip where things started to fall apart. And we did a little Facebook group, and I uploaded all my pictures and whatnot. And I'd say it's about half and half who are... it's actually probably into thirds. There's probably a third that are still evangelical. There are a third that just said, this is for the birds, and jettisoned it. And a third who, one of them, she calls herself a recovering fundamentalist. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of, where I'm at. But I have a 9-year-old, and it took me a long time to take him to church. Mm-hmm. I wanted him to have a spiritual basis. I wanted him to feel comfortable and to have a starting place for his own explorations in the soul. Yeah. But I really had a hard time trusting. Mm-hmm. The church that we're at now, if he said in the middle of Sunday school, I think this is all crap, no one would be shocked. They'd be like, they'd be like, well, why do you say that? And, they would start in a discussion. It wouldn't be, he's not being forced to think certain things. And it's heavy on service. One of the really nice things that's come out of all the Trump stuff is I've really upped my game with volunteerism because it's needed. So we're, my husband and son and I got training, and every 6 weeks our church hosts the homeless in our building. So we're hosts, and which is really eye-opening. It was sort of like, suddenly becoming friends with all the gay people when my mom was dying of AIDS. You realize that they're just people, and they've done some things right, and they've done some things wrong, and they have things to teach us, and it's really rewarding.
Very eye-opening, and to sort of pick out some good kernels in this whole situation.
And I think too, this the last few years really looking at race. I have black friends. I've had black friends for a long time, but never thought to ask them specifically what their thoughts were, and finally did. And it's been really eye-opening, some of the things that they've experienced, some of the crappy things people have said to them.
Really? What kind of things stand out?
One is an officer in the Air Force, and was in charge of this huge event and was orchestrating things, and basically was told plain to her face that you're an N-word and I don't have to do anything you say. Even though she was a highly decorated officer, and these kind of things, and her partner left after she got pregnant, and so she was a single mom, and everybody treated her in the hospital like, here's the welfare papers for you to sign up, this kind of stuff. Never bothered to look at her paperwork and see that she had great medical insurance and that she had this high-powered career and whatnot. Just assumed because she's black and a single mom that here's your welfare papers, let's sign you up for WIC. Those kind of things. So when that kind of that white privilege, once you see it, you can't really unsee it. Yeah, thank goodness.
Yeah, and at that point, then you have to make a decision. What do you do? And it sounds like you guys have,
trying to get busy. And trying to raise a kid who's sensitive to those things. So we talk really openly with my son about experiences that I've had, or the way the world has worked thus far, and why that's not okay. And,
Did you guys? How much did you discuss that kind of stuff? Back when Obama was president, before all this sort of happened.
What's tricky is I married an Air Force officer, and so I left my whole Georgia network and went to Berkeley, California.
Oh, wow.
So I left everything, and when you're a new mom, it's like, there's like blinders. It's like there's the rest of the world doesn't exist. And I really liked Obama. I really trusted Obama. So I had a blissful 8 years of coasting, where I just didn't worry about things too much. I made sure to vote, and that was about it. And that world is gone. Now I'm like, I have to pay attention. I have to check the sources. And I have to look at all the candidates. And what's really frustrating is I consider myself an independent voter. And I do so because I feel that anytime we get so wedded in a party, that then we're not thinking for ourselves anymore. If I can't, I will vote Democrat if I can't, don't have time, or there's no determining factor or whatever. I definitely lean towards the Democratic Party, but I have voted on the other side of the aisle when I felt like that was the best thing, for the county or state or, whatever the election is. But I feel like just that, I see social media is where the tension really comes in. Most of our family here in Athens are very aligned politically, and so it's blissful. We have, lovely Christmas and Thanksgiving dinners. There's no fights, that kind of thing. But my dad was from rural Arkansas, and the family there have let me know under no uncertain terms that they disagree with, things that I posted or those kind of things. And my stance is, I think that the split is very harmful. So I have made, on Facebook, I have friends lists, and I'm very careful about what I post where. So I'm putting out a call for action, or if I'm sharing a frustration or whatever, I will cut out my conservative friends because I don't think they're going to listen. It's just going to make them mad. It's going to make the split worse. So I'm very careful about parsing that. So the things that my conservative family has seen, I mean, they've never seen me go on a Trump tirade. Oh, and believe me, I could. There's so many things I could say that I don't, because I don't think that they're open for listening. It's just going to make things worse. But I did post that I went to the march, and I felt like I needed to take a stand and let them know. You know, but I wasn't in your face about it. And sure enough, you know, I got all this flack. And I had to see all their anti-posts and their incorrect posts. One of the things that made me so angry is when we marched in Atlanta, one of the things I said to my friend Eleanor that I went with is I was so stunned how beautifully organized it was, how kind people were to each other. People were going out of their way to thank the police officers whenever they saw them. And that you had thousands upon thousands of people, and there wasn't even a gum wrapper on the sidewalk. And then on Facebook, you start seeing these pictures of these people came and trashed, and they'd show pictures of overflowing trash cans and stuff stomped on. And I'm like, I don't know where that picture was, but it wasn't along the Atlanta March route. So I'd have to kind of defend things. But it kind of came to a head. This family had been, through their comments, trying to get me back in the fold. You know, they know that we were used to be fundamental and that I did these mission trips and whatnot. And then I just didn't talk about it. They knew we went to church. They were trying to feel me out and figure out, do I fit or do I not fit? And so I had to let them know, no, I do not fit. And what I ended up doing, it took me a month. I wrote a 10-page letter. And I wrote it in their language. So I used the evangelical terms for everything. It was peppered with Bible verses. Because that's what they always think, is that you don't know any better, you don't know the verses or whatever. I know my Bible. So I peppered it with all the Bible verses to back up, my viewpoints. And was very respectful. It was no it was none of that. It was that it was all me. This is what I see, this is what I feel, this is what I'm reacting to. And so I sort of zoomed in on the way the immigrants were being treated and talked about. Also gay rights and the environment. That those were the reasons, the key reasons. I think now I would probably add race, but then I was sort of at the beginning of some more explorations. But those were the key reasons that I went. And I outlined, my beliefs. And I really it was almost like lighting a bomb, rolling it in, and, putting my fingers in my ears and cringing, waiting for the explosion. And one didn't bother to read it. One I never heard anything from. Another one said that she sat down and read it carefully, and that we would just have to agree to disagree. And then there was a woman here that I married into their family, that she's the leader of the Women's Republican group here in Athens. And she said, oh, it's a beautiful letter. We agree about 98%. I'm like, how is that possible? But I never wanted to get into it deep enough with her just because, I don't know, hadn't wanted to go there. But it was nice. After that, they left me alone. They at least knew I had thought it through.
Okay. Well, that's at least something.
It's at least something.
And like you said, those who wanted to read it, read it, and the others, well, you weren't going to convince them anyway.
No. But it was wonderful because it clarified for me. There were a lot of things. One of the things that had really come clear to me as I'm an archivist, and my first, I worked at the McClung Collection in Knoxville and at the Library of Congress in their manuscripts division, and then my first professional job, full job, was at the Georgia Historical Society. And I was given a huge church collection to start out with. And it was really eye-opening to see during this long span of this church what the hot-button topics were, and what people thought was so important. Divorce was one of the hot-button topics of the day when in the early church records, like turn of the century, 1900 or so.
Yeah.
And it was very much considered a community problem.
Yeah.
And basically, if you took that route, you were a second-class citizen the rest of your life. Unless there were a lot of these really sad letters to the minister, because if you could convince your minister that you were in the right, that you had not broken those vows your spouse had, you could continue to be, you could teach Sunday school, people would still invite you to their homes, these kind of things. And so these letters were really heartbreaking to read, but it just made me realize that, later on we just sort of decided that divorce is a private matter. It's not between you and your minister or your congregation.
Yeah.
It's nobody else's business. And now we're very comfortable with that as a society. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
Some of my family in Arkansas that are so against gay people are on their fourth marriage. And, I look at that and I think it's only because of the time period where you live that you're comfortable with one and not with the other.
Yeah.
So that was very eye-opening for me of how much culture is woven into our spirituality and our religion. And that's been my job forever after, is to try to crack those pieces off to get to what is universal and true underneath the culture.
Yeah, and how do you think that experience of looking at, especially at this collection that you started out with, how has that experience informed your perspective over the last year and a half?
Is that a question?
Yeah, that's the question.
I mean, it sort of is. There's that experience, the growing up the way I did, the mission trips, my mom dying of AIDS, all those things, had formed these deep fissures, but I sort of hadn't broken the rest of it apart.
Yeah.
And I think that process of after Trump was elected and realizing that some of the things that I felt were core values were at risk.
Yeah.
It was time to kind of break the rest of that apart and build something. And part of that was also, it was before Trump was elected that we decided my son was old enough. We wanted to start taking him to church. So this had been sort of brewing anyway. But, coming down to what are my personal beliefs and how does that inform the way I need to treat other people?
Yeah.
How does that stack up into what kind of a community person I need to be?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's really frustrated me with a lot of, I call them my Tea Party cousins because they were very Tea Party in Arkansas. And I've got a couple of others sprinkled around, but I think of them as my Tea Partiers. A lot of them don't do anything. They complain. They may take a casserole to the next door neighbor if she's had her appendix out. But I don't see them doing anything to help anybody who looks differently than they do. They help only people whose lives look like their own. It's even kind of a stretch if you're a Baptist to, do something for the Methodists. And I've come to believe that if you're only helping people in your comfort zone whose lives look like yours, your same skin color, your same socioeconomic level or whatever, then you're not doing it right. Sorry, but I feel like we need to get out of our comfort zones in some way, in some capacity, and get to know people that we hadn't known before.
Yeah. And
find out different perspectives of the problem. My Tea Party cousins, they've gone on vacation to Vegas once, kind of people. They've never lived outside of their small community. And it's an echo chamber. They feel a certain way, and all their neighbors feel the same way, so this must be the truth. And I don't want to live that way. I don't want to live thinking that my experience in my life is the truth. It's one perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, especially since because this was my other question, based on what you've said so far, is having seen several different examples of the evangelical church or some version of that, how surprised were you when Trump won?
My husband kept saying he can't do it. There's not enough people that believe that way to sway it. And then I really thought when he mocked the disabled reporter that would be it. I thought for sure that people, yeah. And I didn't realize what a deep affront it was for some people to have a black president and for them to be reelected. Mm-hmm. It was crushing, I think. Mm-hmm. And I think we're in a place in the country where I know my cousins, they supported, there was a Republican candidate in Arkansas who was black, and they supported him openly. And I know that they've all, at work, they're black people, and they'll sit at the same table with them. So they, I think, consider themselves completely non-prejudiced. Mm-hmm. And what I see that they don't see is that it's also a matter of culture, that this unwillingness for their own culture to change, that they want Mayberry to continue. And I understand that, because Mayberry is a lovely place with, you don't lock your doors at night, and everybody knows each other, and it's very friendly.
Yeah.
But all you have to do is walk to the edge of Mayberry, and there's the train tracks, and on the other side, there's a bunch of kids who have to walk a lot farther to a crappier school that don't get, it's not really separate but equal. Yeah. So, I guess one of the other things I've thought a lot about is, my grandpa Fry inherited the family farm. He couldn't make a go of it. Okay. Even though it was in the same place they had lived since long before the Civil War, and several generations before him had made a go of it. Yeah. But because of the changing economy, the boll weevil, the Great Depression, he couldn't make a go of it. He'd become, that kind of small subsistence farm had become obsolete. Mm-hmm. So he made a big change, and he sold the farm, moved to town, bought a blacksmith shop. And he was the county blacksmith for the next few years. But I think you can see where this is going. He was a blacksmith. And when my dad was born in the 30s, the late 30s, there were still a lot of people using wagons and whatnot. My grandpa was building them, but it went obsolete. And so he ended up having to do construction work. And so what I see in these Tea Party cousins is they're still mourning the loss of these older patterns of life. And they want the coal jobs to continue. And many of them were miners. Some of them had, for a time, moved up to the Rust Belt, to Michigan, and then have had that collapse around their ears. And so I feel great pity for them. Yeah. You know, the way their grandfathers and their fathers made a decent life is no longer possible. And they're trailing behind, even though they've done everything they were told to do. It's frustrating. And now the Mexicans are moving in and are, streets in town that had always looked like Mayberry now look very colorful. And they have taquerias, and there's Mexican restaurants of other kinds, and their community has changed a lot. But as a history person and as an archivist, that happens. It's happened over and over and over again. Especially you look at some place like New York City. One of my favorite books is 97 Orchard, where it looks at a tenement house and all the foods that were eaten there, and the waves. It was the Germans first, and then it was, I think, the Russians, and then the Italians. And, as you get this new wave of people, everything changes, the culture changes, the street smells different. Everything is different because it's a different kinds of people speaking different languages. And after a while, you become assimilated, and we accept this as part of our community and move on. But it's been so long, I think, that this little town in Arkansas no longer remembers when these weird foreign European immigrants came in. They were assimilated so long ago that now, and it's, troublesome when these people have a color skin that no matter how long they're here, we can still tell who you are.
Yeah.
There are a lot of issues to be worked out there, but I just feel like they're trying to hold back a flood. We are dealing with overpopulation on this planet.
Yeah.
Globalization is a reality. I watched Trump making these decisions that have big ramifications. You just can't make a quick decision anymore because all the economies are so woven together, and you can't pour your slop jar out here and not realize anymore that it's floating downstream.
Well, apparently you can.
Yes, you can, but you can try.
When you think back to the election, because now we have a year and a half of perspective. But if you remember, do you remember that night? What you thought, what you felt, what you told your kid the next day?
I went to bed thinking it just couldn't happen.
Yeah.
It can't happen. Yeah. I will never forget waking up the next morning and grabbing the phone, and it was like a sucker punch. I felt like I couldn't breathe, and my kid is next to me, so I'm having to make some kind of reaction, and I did. I felt sucker punched, but I didn't believe it could happen, and it was a grief. It was a true grief. Now, one of my friends in Albany said she felt the same way when Obama got elected a second term. So maybe I'm just looking at it from my perspective. But, it was dark. Here in Athens, there was a fire somewhere, like a forest fire or that kind of thing. Uh-huh. And so for about a week, it was that, cough when you walk outside in the dark, whatever. And I said to my husband, I just feel like it's the apocalypse that started.
Yeah.
And I know that I've tried very hard to disengage from the far left or far right media. So it helps a little to look at just the mainstream media. There's a feature on Facebook where you can tell it, I don't want to see anything from this source ever again. And so I did some research. I talked to some historians and asked them, what sources do you use for modern news? And, these kind of things. I went to some people that I really trusted and talked with them about sources. And so I've disconnected those, and that helps to not get that crazy news from the far sources. But I still feel like it's a lot of dark news when I look at who they've put in charge of the EPA and some of the things that have been reversed. Betsy DeVos. It just feels real dark. I'm hoping that Steve Bannon really is as out as it seemed to indicate, because I felt like he was a lot of the problem. Yeah. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. It's hard to get a good beat on it, and it's hard to know how awful Trump really is. I mean, he almost just doesn't even seem human anymore. He's like a puppet character. And to look at him and try to think of him as a human being and try to get figure out what the real perspective is.
Yeah, and it's, you talk about sort of the news sources and trying to make sense of it since then, and so it's very interesting to be talking about, the last year and a half, and it's kind of hard to remember what things were like back then, and like you described it as a grief, and it sounds like, you're sort of just looking for solid information is kind of how the things that you've said, and how do you figure out what's happening. What about you said you have a 9-year-old son?
Yeah.
What do you Do you guys ever talk about this?
We do talk about some things. I have told him that he knows I don't care for the current administration, and he knows why. I've shown him these are the things that really are red flag warnings. And he also knows that there's a difference between not caring for the political policies and then not liking the personalities. And I was like, look, it's both here. You always had the feeling with the Bush family, I didn't care for a lot of things they did. I didn't trust that they were deep into oil.
Yeah.
But I would have no trouble inviting them over for dinner. If they became members of my church, it would be fine with me. But when it comes to Trump, if he became scout leader of my kids' scout pack, we'd leave. If he became minister of my church, we'd leave. He was one of my least favorite celebrities long before he threw his hat in the political ring.
Oh, yeah.
I had a friend who, she always wanted me to watch The Apprentice with her, and I couldn't stomach him. He's abrasive and aggressive and disrespectful to so many.
Oh, yeah.
So I told my son that it's on these two levels. That, I want somebody that, we can't fling the doors wide open for immigrants.
Right.
But we need somebody who's going to treat them as human beings and look at the needs carefully and in a careful way do as much as we can do.
Right.
And that with the EPA, you have to juggle sometimes. You can't make these snap decisions that crush a whole industry. Sometimes you have to phase in changes or phase out old technologies. So, I'm a moderate. I try to explain to him that even though, administration may not do instantly what we want, if we feel like they're listening and they're open, then it's okay that they're in power and that I don't feel that way right now.
Yeah.
But I've also told him that whether it comes to choosing a church or someone to vote for, whether to be religious or not, all those decisions are up to him.
Yeah.
And that he'll have to look at things carefully and make his own decisions, that I hope he'll do that in an objective sort of way without too much entanglement with emotions.
Yeah.
So we're, it's, now our discussions are sort of as things unfold, I'll explain to him, why something bothers me and what my thoughts are on it. And, but he loves history, and so a lot of times he gets these kids' history books, and so then we can talk about modern versus what happened in World War II or the Civil War, and sort of how all those pieces are still echoing, and some of those kind of things, which is nice.
Yeah. Do you guys ever talk about the history of protesting in the U.S.? I mean, just since you mentioned that, like Vietnam versus today, or.
Well, it's really interesting. I've taken my husband runs summer camps for kids, and so in the summertime he's so busy we don't see him. And my job is flexible. I work from home, and so I take my son on the road. I have the last 2 years, and we have another trip planned. We went up the eastern seaboard last summer, and we went to Fort McHenry, and he does the Junior Ranger badges, which are really awesome.
Okay.
Kids earn a badge, but they really have to earn it. It's about an hour's worth of work at least, sometimes 2 hours, for them to look at all the displays and pull things together. That sometimes they have to write a paragraph, or it's a fantastic program. So he did this in-depth program with the Fort McHenry, and the next day we went to the new National Park site for Harriet Tubman, and he did a Junior Ranger badge there. And then all holy heck broke loose with this business of kneeling for the national anthem. And my kid had a far more thoughtful perspective than any grown-up that I encountered, because he'd been to Fort McHenry. He saw the flag flying. We talked about how emotional it was, and we read through the whole anthem and talked about what that night might have been like, because the museum really helps you get into that,
cool.
That feel of they darken there's a room where you walk in and it's all dark, and they talk about the flag and they're projecting things on the wall and whatnot, and they talk about that night and how scary it was and how the United States was almost lost, and then they raise up these screens and you're looking at Fort McHenry and the huge flag, and your heart just goes, gulp, I love my country, But then the next day we're learning about Harriet Tubman had blackouts her whole life because somebody in a store was mad about something and just cold-cocked her because she happened to be a black child standing there and they could do it. And about her trying to get her family out and all the people she had helped. So he was looking at all these perspectives and thinking about those kind of issues and ideas.
Yeah.
Which, you know, so many people were just like, they just came to their conclusion so quickly. Never thought about, you know, any of it. So he and I talked about this football player and why he had made that decision. We found an article that he talked about what he had chosen, that at first he was going to sit down and another guy convinced him that taking a knee was much more respectful and he wanted to be respectful.
Right.
So we talked about that. We talked about, you know, so we have a good friend that she's a Tea Partier and she's married to a police officer. And that's one of the reasons she voted for Trump, because he's pro-law enforcement. But how do you, how do you find this common ground between, we have a friend who's a police officer, we have people who really hate the police because of some of the violence that's happened in Charlottesville and these kind of things. So trying to help him to understand that so much of it is about perspective. And you can't choose where you're born and where you grow up and what your perspective is, but you can choose to get outside your perspective.
Yeah.
And if you can't travel, if you can't go anywhere, you can go to the library and you can start reading.
Yeah.
You can choose movies that are different than you would normally choose. You can choose to sit with people at lunch that you don't normally sit with.
Yeah.
You can, there's so many different ways to choose to rub elbows with people you don't normally rub elbows with, and to ask them honest questions and really listen to what they have to say of what's your experience, what's your...
Yeah, where do you come from?
Yeah.
Did you take him to the march with you?
I did not. I wonder sometimes if my journey would have been quicker if my mother hadn't dragged me with her all these evangelical places. She took us to some crazy places. I remember these huge rallies with everybody speaking in tongues and their hands in the air. And I just didn't want him... It was sort of understood at the time that I would follow, that she was right and I would follow what she was doing.
Right.
And I don't want him to feel that same way. I want him to make his own decisions. But I also, it was my first march, and I was afraid of Charlottesville, is basically what I was afraid of. And I was afraid to go. I was like, am I making a poor decision as a mom? My kid's depending on me and I'm going. And I went with another mom, and we decided that if anything started to look bad, we were going to get out of there for the sake of our children and our families. And then, of course, it was fine.
You went to the one in Atlanta, right?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was absolutely fine. And it was, by the time we were done, it was threatening these, it was January, and it was threatening these horrible storms and whatnot, and it was pouring down rain, and we were just like, we just drove there with this grim determination of, we are going to do this. We've got to do something.
Yeah.
We can't sit on our cans. We've got to do something. And then by the end, we were just like, woo! You know, we were feeling so good. We were surrounded by like-minded people, and, you know, so many signs just cracked us up that we started feeling like, okay, there's a lot of people. And then you get home and you see the news and you see that what happened in Atlanta was repeated over and over and over and over.
Well, I want to...
It was beautiful.
Yeah, I know, and I have so many questions from what you just said. On the way, driving to Atlanta, when you guys were in the car, and I remember that day, it was pouring down rain.
Pouring!
Okay, sorry about that.
That's all right. We were talking about the drive on the way there, but I don't know what question you were in for.
And it's funny that we stopped right there because I actually did remember what I was going to say. My question was, as you're driving through the pouring rain, not knowing what to expect, like, at any point did you guys say, you know what, let's just not do this?
When we finally got to the edge of Atlanta and we had lunch, we both admitted that if either one of us had said no, we would have skedaddled. But I don't know. It really felt caught between wanting to do the safe thing for my family, but also feeling like something bigger had to be done for our country, for my son's future, and for the future of lots of kids across the United States.
that what you guys talked about on the way?
Yeah, we did. We felt, pretty conflicted between big picture, small picture. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Never had national politics ever seemed that crucial to me as it did after we saw that Trump was elected.
Yeah, what did you hope would come out of that day with the march, and what did you expect?
I mostly hope to get home safely. I'll be honest. But I kept thinking about the white ministers who marched in the civil rights era. They didn't stand to gain anything. Mm-hmm. They only stood to lose, but they did it anyway because it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I have since heard, there was an article about Katrina. You know how you read an article and you don't realize later how much you're going to think about it because you'd have saved it if you'd known?
Yeah.
But this article talked about they were finding that in the days after Katrina in New Orleans, that the helicopters would stop on rooftops to pick up white people and not black people. That there was a difference in the percentages. And that once people started figuring this out, the white people dispersed and they would put mixed groups on the rooftops because the helicopters would stop. And I thought, if I can be the white person standing next to the dark person to make sure that they get what they need, I need to be on the rooftop. So that's what the march, I couldn't articulate it then, I hadn't read that article yet, but that was sort of the feeling is that if white people got us into this mess, maybe white people need to get us out of this mess.
Fair enough.
And need to start listening. And I'd always had such admiration for those white ministers and others. It wasn't just the ministers. I remember there's one woman who was, she was killed in a car bomb, but she had been driving people around for some of the civil rights. I can't remember her name. I need to remember her name because she sacrificed so much. And she was just this ordinary person and a mom trying to do the right thing. And I hope we're not heading in a direction where those kind of sacrifices are going to come up in the end. But I got to do something.
Yeah. Was there any one particular issue that made you want to go out and do this?
Well, it was the three. When I wrote my 10-page letter, it was the way the immigrants were being discussed and the environment and science, sort of that. I ended up marching a year later in March for the March for Science. Mm-hmm. And then also the gay rights, that I felt that those, were pretty crucial. There was, you don't hear much about it now, and I don't know if things have gotten better, but for a while, there were a lot of people sending their children up from Latin America, thinking that if we can't get all in, they'll at least let my kid in. And so there are kids that are, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old that are making this journey, being entrusted with neighbors or strangers or whatever, and then facing, turnaround that is just... again, I'm not saying we need to open the doors wide, but we need to have some honest discussions, and we need to talk about these people as human beings and empathize with their plights.
Yeah.
I ended up making a friend in California that they left Mexico because in their small village, people kept getting shot on the highway coming into the town, and they couldn't figure out how. It was like people who had gone to live in the city, they'd be coming back into the town to bring resources and, visit the family, and they would be shot on the highway and everything stolen. And they found out later the phones were tapped by these drug cartels. And so they knew when people were coming. I'm going to leave at 8 o'clock, and I'll be there at 10. And they would wait for them on the highway and shoot them. And so when her uncle died, she's like, I've had enough.
Yeah.
Her children were getting to the age where they were going to start commuting to the university, and she's like, I don't want them on that highway.
Yeah. And
I think, my tea cousins in Arkansas, when I told them that story, you could see in their eyes it started to change a little bit. Instead of those filthy people trying to come up here and take what's ours, they were people in need.
Yeah.
That, you know, and I pointed out, it's because the insatiable market for drugs in the United States that things have gone pretty far awry down in Mexico. I mean, it's, you can't just say, well, they ruined their country. No, we're a part of that. We're their neighbors, we're their business partners. We're part of this monkey mess, and we need to sit down and sort this stuff out rather than calling names and building a wall. And
Oh, yeah. And being the gatekeepers.
Being the
Going back
gatekeepers.
to what you...
Yeah.
So, when you did go to the march, because it sounds like a lot of your experience has been with people outside of your, like, not within a comfort zone. Like, you've had family members and community members who are very different from you. And so you've spent some time and resources, energy trying to figure out how other people were and relate to people who are different from you. Do you remember how you felt when you showed up at the march and saw all those other people who were there for a common purpose?
Yeah, that was a good feeling. We mixed with a lot of people because it took so long. You know, first we were like, when are they going to get this thing started? And then eventually word came through that it started a long time ago. It's just so big that if you're towards the middle or the back, you're going to wait a while to actually put foot in motion. And so there was a lot of discussions and chatting with people and that sort of thing. And that's, again, where the fear started to go away and, you know, started to feel really good about who we were with and who rubbing shoulders with. And it was a good feeling.
It's very different to, you know, coming in and seeing that I'm not alone, which is a pretty amazing feeling.
Yeah.
Did you see anybody that you knew besides your friend that you came with?
She did. I did not. I mean, it was such a vast ocean of humanity.
Oh yeah. Where were you guys hanging out?
So we parked at a MARTA station and came in, and then we waited near the Children's Museum and the Centennial Park and all that. We were right in that area.
Oh, neat. Okay.
Waiting, and then, you know, started in.
Yeah. Oh, neat. Okay. What about? Do you remember any? Did you guys bring signs?
My friend carried one, and I can't even remember what she put on. I think hers was a science thing because she's a biologist. And I brought poster board and was going to, and I ended up feeling at first more of an observer, and then later I ended up writing a few things on it. My 3 on it. I just wrote, "This is why I'm here." 1, 2, 3. But you know, some of them were so clever and so awesome. I knew I didn't want to bash the other viewpoint, and I don't care for Trump at all, but I don't want to cause him any harm and don't, you know, any of those kind of things. To tell you the truth, what I would love to do is pack him off for 1 or 2 years to work in a small village in Mexico. You know, carrying water, chopping wood, planting with his own hands. That's what I would wish on him if I could. Yeah.
Would change his life. No
Yeah.
doubt. Yeah. Well, you mentioned some of the signs that were clever. Like, what were some of your
I don't
favorite?
remember. I took a lot of pictures, and I didn't repost ones that were the funniest. And then later I posted them once I had done those friends lists. But, there was one that was beautiful that was just a Cheeto with the hair on the top, and there were some really clever ones. I can forward those if y'all want.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you'd be willing to share those, because there were so many, and it's hard to have pictures of all of them.
Yeah.
So, okay.
You know, I traveled to Japan many years ago now. But my friend, I was with my little brother, and we went to, I'm trying to think what the name of it is now. It's this famous Zen garden where they rake the rocks. And, so we decided we were going to do this, and you go in, and it's considered holy ground, so that you take off your shoes, and you're given these little rubber shoes to wear. which if you're Gaijin, which is foreigner, nothing ever fits. 'Cause it's, I'm so much bigger, I'm 5'9", I'm bigger than most of the men over there. So I had these little rubber shoes that didn't really fit. But we come in, and it's almost like a train platform where you sit along this cement platform, and below is like a little paved area, and then there's the rock garden. And the monks are there finishing up we went in the morning, so they're finishing up, and they rake it all smooth in these beautiful patterns around the larger rocks. They rake the gravel. And so everybody is lined up, along here. Again, it reminded me of a railway thing. Everything is long. And I'm sitting there, and my rubber clog drops off. And I'm like, oh no! And luckily they had that little paved area, so it didn't hit the raked gravel. But I had to jump down and get this clog. And we had been told that if you come with an open heart and come prayerfully, that you will receive wisdom. You will receive what you need to know from this experience. And here I am dropping my rubber clog. And I was like, so I look around and I'm like, what do I do? And then I thought, okay, I'm just going to jump down there and grab it, because I'm not going to hurt anything by jumping down. It's paved. And I jump down and I crouching down, and I pick up the clog and I look up, and I realize that all those rocks look different than they had when I was sitting up top.
Yeah.
Because my perspective had changed.
Yeah.
And I put on my rubber clog, and I scramble back up, and I sit down, and then I stood up, and then I walked up and down the platform, looking at how the rocks look different from different perspectives. And I thought, it's really only the monks and God himself who sees the other side of the rocks and knows the full lay of this thing and what it really looks like.
Yeah.
But if I had not dropped my rubber clog, I would have only thought, you're not paying too much attention when you walk in. You're intent on where you're going to sit. And you sit down and you see it, and then you get up and your attention is taken again by navigating out of between so many people.
Yeah.
So without dropping my clog, it would have never occurred to me that there was more than one perspective to see this thing. I mean, we're all here looking there. Aren't we all seeing the same thing?
Yeah.
No. And I realized even at the time that experience with AIDS, that close brush with this socially unacceptable disease that the evangelicals felt was God's punishment for wickedness, was the equivalent of dropping the rubber clog, where I had to jump down there and take care of this problem, and then saw a different perspective, and from then on out could never not understand that I'm only seeing one perspective.
Yeah, and similar to that, it seems catastrophic at the moment it happens.
Yeah.
You think,
I'm about to get kicked out of here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So then, wow, that's really interesting. You've done a lot of reflecting on things. I mean, clearly. No, that's true. Most people just don't really put stuff together necessarily like that. So it's very interesting to hear something that you've clearly really turned over in your mind several times. So, all right, so you said you went to the march, and driving home you felt like there was...
Yeah, we felt euphoric. We did. It was kind of a mountain thing. And several other people from church had gone. Some had gone to Washington, D.C., and some of my family had gone to Washington, D.C. And it was a struggle then to keep it going. Like we started we called it Faith Unleashed, which the shortened is FU, but...
I never thought of that. Yes, that's nice. You know what? That's...
And it's become just sort of a discussion group every now and then. But at first we were trying to meet once a month and talk about how to make headway on some issues and things. And when I saw that, people are so busy, it's sort of hard to hold on to that. That's when my family got the training for the homeless, and we're trying to pick up some other pieces.
Yeah.
One of the things, I wrote this book about family recipes and foodways, and it's clear to me that that's a great way to get outside your perspective. That weird foreignness is only weird until you like part of it.
Yeah.
So, when you try food from Syria, or you try food, we love Mexican food. Okay, this is part of the culture that you're trying to keep out.
Yeah.
I think with some of like my Tea Party cousins, it's enough to sort of share some recipes and broaden their thinking about culture through foodways. So I haven't done as much as I've meant to. My book came out, I guess it was the year before, but it's been quite a wild ride of trying to juggle everything. And I was keeping a blog, and it just sort of went by the wayside. But I have plans to get back to that, and that in the back of my mind is one of my goals. Is there's a place called Jubilee Partners that's in Comer, Georgia. That's a refuge for refugees from all over the world. So I've thought about maybe reaching out to see if I could interview some of them about their foodways and just find some common ground.
Yeah.
There's a guy, I did a program at the Library of Congress and met this guy that he was a Marine and did water rescues. That's what he was trained in. So when he got out of the Marines, he's been volunteering in Greece, helping those rafts come in from Syria. Because a lot of times they, not a lot of times, but it's happened many times that they've capsized trying to get in. It's a real danger point. So but he also loves food, and he bought my book and then shared it with these refugees in this camp because they couldn't carry their recipes, so they're trying to recreate them using the steps in my book. Cool. And he sent me this picture of this Syrian family gathered around, and on the floor is my book. You know, just like, yay!
That's cool.
So I'm trying to, I've got more work to do in that area. When you've got a kid, and I also have in-laws who are depending on me, they don't drive, and my mother-in-law has dementia, so I'm in that sandwich generation. Yeah. So I realize that there's only so much I can do right now, but I've got to keep doing something.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at ways through foodways, to sort of help people accept other cultures.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you'd already kind of started on that path, and it just fits so nicely. You know, those are skills you already have that you can use.
Well, I think that's part of it, is finding, we each have our own talents, our own interests, and when you go against that, it's like bending something against, like you bend a sapling the wrong way, it just wants to snap back.
Yeah.
But if you can find ways to serve the community and make the world a better place using your talents and your interests, it'll stick. It may not, I'm not as far with this project as I would like, but I've never forgotten it. I'm still moving along, slowly with it.
Yeah, and I mean, how you mentioned before about wanting to feel like you have some momentum, and it's hard to keep that up.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like something you're clearly passionate about already. So how is the thing with your family going as well, where you guys are helping out every 6 weeks? Is that?
Yeah, we've kept up with that. It's really eye-opening. You have certain ideas of what you think homeless people are like, and then you realize that the only thing you've ever said to them is hello, or would you like a bottle of water. That's all you've ever said. Yeah. And this is different. We're evening hosts, and so we sit down to a meal with them. And we have to, like anytime you're in a situation where you're sitting next to people you don't know, how do you make them comfortable and make them feel welcome? And my kid plays with those kids, and they're just kids to him. I mean, they all run off to the playground and do their thing.
It's amazing how kids can do that.
Yeah. But it's, eye-opening it's been really good for my husband and I to realize that, I mean, there's so much of thinking that other people are other. And we're all just human beings. I mean, we have so much more in common than we ever have unalike. And that's true with conservatives and liberals and Republicans and Democrats and Mexicans and Americans and
evangelicals and Mennonites. Yeah. And if you can, what you mentioned about sitting down at a table and you try to make other people feel welcome and connect with them. Yeah.
That book, 97 Orchard, that I like so much about the tenement food and whatnot. the ones that had the hardest time assimilating because the culture was so set against them were the Italians, because they were Catholic so much, and they felt that people in the United States felt that the Pope was going to take over the United States or take over, have too much political power if we let these people in. And they were considered too hot-blooded and too emotional to fit in and assimilate. And it was also decided that their food was so trashy and lowbrow that nobody would like it anyway. And I wrote this in part of that 10-page letter to my cousins. I was like, compare that to an Olive Garden commercial. Yeah.
Pizza, well, not Italian, but it's kind of a quintessential Italian.
It has that
roots. Italian. Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Well, now that we're a year and a half out from the election and a little over a year from kind of when you started your journey on this protest movement, essentially, how do you feel? Like, how do you feel now?
It is hard to keep the momentum, but I think the church that we go to, which is Covenant Presbyterian here in town, is really helpful because we are surrounded by like-minded people, and they've done things like we did I'm trying to think of what they called it. It was like a gathering to discuss race, and so we're doing various things like that. We have a sister church that's a primarily black church, and that we're trying to blend more and more and share more and more, and these kind of things. So it's kind of nice when you have a group of like-minded people that are helping move things forward. The Facebook thing, the Facebook friends list has really helped because I can keep it from getting too emotional and crazy, yet still share with like-minded friends when I want to.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. I hadn't heard of anybody else doing that, but that's a really interesting sort of idea, way to do that. Like you said, it reduces the division, and
it does. Yeah, and there's some. We all have some of those hot button people that don't mind being insulting, and sometimes I'll even just exclude them from a post so they don't see it.
Yeah.
Even if I know, I have a former teacher from high school that he's great and he's funny and he's smart and I enjoy what he says, but he will get on and insult everybody I know who doesn't agree. It's not helping anything.
Yeah.
They don't. Yeah, doesn't help.
Yeah. Yeah. Where do you see us going from here? Where do you hope we're going from here?
Well, I think one of the things that's come clear to me is that no matter Stormy Daniels or anything else, there is a core group that will follow him and are so determined that everything that they don't care for is fake news, that he has a strong support system, and we cannot rest.
Yeah.
So being, politically aware, making sure I never miss an election, passing on information I feel is important via these Facebook friend groups so that I'm not making the rift wider, but I'm getting the information to the people that it will help.
Right.
And then I try as much as I can to post things on Facebook that are moderate and that are inclusive.
Right.
How we're all alike and, these kind of things. For a while, once a week, I was posting an article. I've tried to find an article about a life from someone different than myself.
Oh, interesting.
Hey, this is an article I learned something from. I had a disclaimer that I always put at the top that, it's not that I wholeheartedly agree with what this person said. It's that I'm trying to get outside of my own viewpoint and tent.
Yeah.
And after a while, I got some flack occasionally, but mostly nobody clicked on it. And after a while, it was just so exhausting with everything else I had on to continue. Yeah. But it was good for a while. I kind of went through about 10 articles that I had really felt were interesting about. One was a mom that had black and white children and then things that she noticed the differences between the two. One was John Cleese wrote an interesting article about political correctness and humor and, just trying to get myself out of my comfort zone and get people thinking along the lines of stop it defending your little group long
Right.
enough to look at these problems and find a new perspective.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, that's a good thing to take away from this. What do you hope your son has learned from all this, from watching you and just in general?
I hope most of all he's learned that people are people and that everybody is deserving of your respect. That you judge someone by the contents of their character, not by their gender or their race or their political clout or anything else. But I also hope he will feel free to make up his mind. As someone with the information science degree, I'm always trying to teach him about sources and evaluating your sources, and whether that's what a kid says to you on the playground or whether it's a source that you need for a report on Apollo 11 or whether that's what somebody political is saying about a political opponent.
Yeah.
To stop and look at your sources and evaluate them carefully.
Is there anything else that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to?
I've talked your ear off.
That's what this is for.
I don't think so.
Okay. Just look and make sure there's nothing else Yeah, I mean, I feel like we did take a circuitous route, but it's good. Well, thank you very much
You're welcome.
for sharing your story, and
Thanks for letting me share.
it's great.
I hope that by the time people look at these in years, that I don't know one of the things I tell my son is that a lot of times things get worse right before they get better. I think my dad talked a little bit about during the civil rights era that suddenly people who'd known each other all their lives in this small southern town were sort of afraid to talk to each other. It was awkward. The white people had never really considered the fact that things had been bad for their neighbors. And it was awkward for a little while. And I think there are a lot of people who were angry about a black president or about various things that I hope some of that will burn itself off. But I guess the last thing I'll say, I went to a great lecture at the National Archives, the southeast one in south of Atlanta. They brought in one of the Tuskegee Airmen.
Wow.
And he was fascinating. He talked about that the German POWs they brought over were allowed to sit in the regular seats at the movie theater, and the Tuskegee Airmen fighting for the country had to sit in the balcony. He was furious about it. At that moment, as he told it, he was still furious. I couldn't blame him a bit. But somebody asked him, well, how could you fight for a country that did that? And he said, because there's progress. He said, it's not straight. It's raggedy progress. But it gets better. And I think with Trump's election and some of those things, I know I'm a better person than I was a year and a half ago. And I think a lot of my friends and family are more aware. I think I've done a better job raising my son in the last year and a half in terms of these issues. It might not have been on my radar. So I'm with the Tuskegee Airmen that it's raggedy progress, but I'm really hoping that it is progress and that we'll be a lot more careful about how we treat our environment and how we treat people who look differently than us. And
Yeah.
so hope. Let's end
Amen.
on hope.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's a good place to stop because I can't get any better than that.